These are stories of death, murder, bloodbaths, gore, and boiling oil. You know, this is a very old book. These were written by my wife. In the old days, they used to have all these cookery classes. And she's kept it all these years. I think it's easily 40 years old. Look at her writing those days. And you can see that she has recently written on it because the current writing is also there. The thing about Mala's writing is you need a microscope to read it. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you about a murder. Arjun was about 35 years old when they brought him to court. He had no lawyer, no solicitor would represent him. The registrar of the High Court called and said, could you represent him? We can't give you any money. There's a murder case in which he's the only accused. Could you please defend him? I am a corporate lawyer, and murder cases were the furthest things from my mind. But because the court asked for help, I went and bought a book on murder trials by a gentleman called Malik in India, and I read it from cover to cover, and then went to court. And in the course of cross-examination, this is what transpired. Arjun was a lorry driver and he had a sister. His sister married Arjun's best friend. Arjun's best friend was Bill. So Bill eventually became Arjun's brother-in-law. Although he was a nice fellow at first, when the children were beginning to be born to the young family, Bill became more and more bitter and morose with the sister, and he beat her up every single day. And when the children grew up, and the eldest boy, we shall call him Joe, grew to be 9 years old, he would often run to Arjun and say, Mama, Mama. Mama in Tamil means mother's younger brother. He would say, Mama, Daddy is beating up Mommy. Can you come and stop him? And so by the time they would get there, the lady would be lying in a swoon, injured everywhere, and Arjun would confront Bill and say, stop doing this, don't do it, you have children. And this went on for about 5 years. One day Bill decided to shift his house from the deep and suburban part of Kuala Lumpur into the commercial district because he had some work there, and they moved into a cheap set of flats onto the 3rd floor. So they spent the whole day moving all the stuff from the house up through the staircase. There was no lift, and the things lying everywhere in the new house. The men had been drinking all night after a tiring day of shifting. They continued drinking late into the night. When they rose in the morning, they were sloshed, both of them, Arjun and Bill. And Bill was insisting that the sister cook for him breakfast and then afterwards lunch. And at some point, when the wife wasn't cooking fast enough, Bill attacked her, at which point Arjun, enraged by the way his sister was being treated, rose and pointed a finger at Bill and said, stop it, and stop it now. But Bill continued to berate his wife in foul language before the little children, called her a prostitute and various other words, completely unparliamentary. And again, when Arjun intervened, the square choppers the Chinese used to cook? There was one lying near the dining table. Bill took it and he chopped the head of Arjun And this knife, there was a photograph, knife sticking to his skull, still there and hadn't fallen off. And in a reaction, Arjun grabbed a machete and began to attack his brother-in-law, Bill, slashing his head. Until he said in court, he could hear little Joe holding his hand saying, "Mama, Mama, please stop, Mama, please stop. It's Daddy you're hurting." And then when Arjun looked at his hands were covered in blood. His brother-in-law was on his knees. His entire head and shoulders were filled with blood. There was blood spurting out from the top of the head and different parts of the shoulder. And then he collapsed face forward. And then he didn't move. And Joe was weeping. The sister had rushed in and looked at the husband and looked at Arjun and said, "What have you done? You've made me a widow, you idiot. You're drunk. Why can't you control your temper?" And then Arjun left the knife where he was standing, went to the hall and sat quietly until the police came an hour later. And when they arrested him and asked him to rise, he complied meekly. They asked him to point to the knife. He pointed to it. He asked them what he had done. He told them the story. They took him and they put him in the cell. He himself was bleeding. No treatment was given to him. The police department was busy. They could only take him to the doctor within about 12 hours. And by the time they had done a blood test, it was 24 hours later, and it showed the content of alcohol in the blood was so high. The doctors even wondered whether he could move his limbs and direct his mind and his limbs to attack someone like Billy. Billy had more than 40 cuts all across his face and his shoulders, and his skull had basically been minced. The other parts of his bodies were perfectly pristine and clean, but not his head or his shoulders. So when the matter came up for trial, I took the position that the amount of alcohol in Arjun's blood was so large, even after 24 hours, at the time that the crime occurred, he could not have formed an intent to kill. He must have acted instinctively, self-preservation. The other side, of course, the prosecution didn't agree and said that this was a social crime. A strong message had to be sent, and the man had to be sent to the gallows. The turning point came when the main prosecution witness, little Joe, was brought in for testimony, and he looked at me and he was terrified. I asked him a couple of questions. He was terrified. The trial judge, her name was Madam Justice Zahra. Later she became Chief Judge Malaya. A little dynamite she was. She looked at me and she said, "I don't know what your intention is, defense counsel. Can you please be a bit more gentle with the witness?" And I said, "Yes, my lady." And I asked the court whether the boy could face the judge, not face me, and only answer the judge. And I could see the boy's hands trembling. And this lady, this judge, Zahara, stopped the proceedings and she asked him, "Are you cold?" And he said, "Yes," in Tamil. Then she gave instructions to her registrar, who went into the judge's chambers and returned with an admiralty, what do you call them? Sweatshirts. The one with the symbol of admiral. Very expensive. She told the boy with a smile, "I have washed it. I have not worn it at all. It's very clean. Please put it on." And because the lady was petite, the boy could put it on. And then I asked question, he answered, and unerringly he pointed a finger at Arjun, and I could see that he was not willing to implicate his uncle. He could understand in his little mind that it was his father who had attacked his mother. But eventually, when the matter came up, the prosecution insisted that he must be convicted of murder. The judge thought long and hard about it and eventually said, "No, she's reducing it to manslaughter." He was sentenced to 15 years in imprisonment. there were three things that were of profound experience to me. The kindness of the judge, a witness who was torn between his uncle and his father, and a poor woman who had become a widow and regretted it despite the fact that she had a husband who was maltreating her. The man has come out of prison, the family is broken. Sad, isn't it? Reflect on that. Treat your wife with love and care. And little children should never be exposed to this kind of violence. It occurs across our entire society. We might want to think about that. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was as profound for you as it has been for me. Thank you very much and good night.